Dear participants, the EFFECT team warmly welcomes you to this fifth module on translating evidence into action. Successfully completing this module will allow you to learn how to communicate evidence, learn how to interpret evidence, in particular the difference between size and significance, and learn about participatory research and mixed methods. Therefore, the purposes of this module include to complete your competences to interpret evidence, raise awareness on how to correctly communicate evidence, and introduce you into participatory research and mixed methods. Dear participants, welcome to submodule 5.1, in which we will define the concept of a stakeholder. Let's start by asking ourselves, what is a stakeholder? Franklin describes stakeholders from an organizational point of view by stating that stakeholders are anyone or anything that is or can be influenced by the actions of another stakeholder. Likewise, we can define a stakeholder as anyone or anything that is or could be influenced by a given public policy. Dear participants, welcome to submodule 5.2, in which you will see why we have discussed the notion of stakeholder. Indeed, today we will talk about the reasons behind stakeholder engagement. Here again, let's ask ourselves why we should engage with stakeholders. Because stakeholders can influence policy actions and contribute to success or failure of a policy, and therefore, understanding what drives stakeholders' decisions might be helpful to understand when stakeholder engagement might be useful for decision making. Indeed, stakeholder engagement can also lead to value creation. If we create value for all the stakeholders, our interactions with these stakeholders reinforce, which will then lead to trust-based relationships with our stakeholders. These relationships will then lead to interactions which create shared meaning and thus again create value for all stakeholders. And this way, we are able to start some kind of a virtuous circle. Dear participants, welcome to submodule 5.3 on evidence translation. The Ingold and Monaghan model describes how evidence is translated into policy. Starting from the zeitgeist and the policy problem, the policymakers set the agenda to introduce a given policy while relying on a previously chosen type of evidence. Policy ideas are then selected in the filtration process, undergoing public scrutiny and organizational resistance before being implemented by the policy apparatus. In this whole process, the translation of evidence is crucial to drive the policymaking process. Dear participants, welcome to submodule 5.4, in which we will discuss evidence interpretation. Over the last modules, we have discussed the significance of a variable, and therefore, let us reconsider this aspect to highlight an important thing. To highlight this aspect, let's focus on a case study based on the article The Impact of an Online Game-Based Financial Education Course, Multi-Country Experimental Evidence, co-authored by Marta Canistra and other research colleagues, who found that an online game-based financial education tool increases financial literacy. When looking at their results, it should be highlighted that there are differences between the significance level of a variable and the size of an impact. A huge size impact can be less significant, as we see, for example, for the interaction effect for Slovakia, while smaller impacts can be more significant, such as we see for the interaction effect for Italy, for instance. Dear participants, welcome to this submodule 5.5 on evidence communication. The first very important aspect when communicating evidence is know your audience. Are you facing an interested audience, which might be curious and indicated interest in the topic? Are you facing an uninterested audience, which might believe that the topic might not be relevant for their lives? If you do so, then reflect on how to motivate them. Are you facing a skeptical or even polarized audience, which is the most challenging task? Then, engaging with the audience can be helpful. Try to avoid saying, I know the evidence, here it is, accept it. The art is rather to acknowledge the audience's counter-arguments, to allow them to feel heard. To establish trust in the evidence communicated, it can be helpful to be transparent regarding the data methods and the funding sources, and to highlight that the evidence was actually published in peer-reviewed journals and can thus be considered as scientifically solid. So as you can see, transparency and scientific robustness can help to establish trust in the evidence. As we have previously mentioned, dialogue might allow audiences to feel heard, which can be used for evidence in policy as well. And therefore, by entering into dialogue with the public, you allow them to better understand the respective policy and the underlying evidence. Dear participants, welcome to submodule 5.6 on participatory research. Aspects of participatory research include a vision of social transformation and greater social justice, which means that the research conducted is not value neutral, and a research with and about people, which means that rather than only being participants of the study, people actually become involved, as we will see in the following example. Dear participants, welcome to submodule 5.7, in which we will conduct a case study on participatory research and highlight how participants can even become actors participating in the research. Indeed, Stephen Camis and his colleagues describe a case study on recycling among students of the 12th grade, which is a great example of participatory research. The participatory research setting actually emerged from a focus group on learning, inclusive school culture, and becoming actors for change, as especially students from the 12th grade were very concerned in greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore, the whole group started to purchase recycling bins. The students started to go to classes, post online messages, and raise awareness on the topic. Then, the students started to conduct interviews on how to grow and sustain sustainable habits, posted decreases in garbage produced, and started to have an international outreach, such as presentations at international conferences, where they were able to present their achievements. So as you can see, from the students in a focus group, which were at the beginning only participants of the research, became actually actors for change and actors in the research process. Dear participants, welcome to submodule 5.8 on mixed methods. To better understand what mixed methods are, we should first draw the difference between qualitative and quantitative research. Whereas qualitative research is based on interaction and communication between researcher and participants, for instance, based on focus groups, interviews, field interviews, etc., quantitative research is based on numerical data and statistical inference, and therefore based on regional data, dropout rates, the PISA results, etc. Mixed methods now consist in combining both quantitative and qualitative research. So a study that relies both on quantitative and qualitative methods is called a mixed method study. Dear participants, welcome to submodule 5.9, in which we will do a short case study on mixed methods. Our case study will be based on the article Fostering Effective Learning Strategies in Higher Education, a Mixed Method Study, published by Felicitas Biva and colleagues, who found that knowing about effective learning strategies led to more people using such strategies. As you can see on this graphical representation of the study procedure, the methodology included both randomization, intervention, and data analysis, which are typical quantitative research techniques, and focus group discussions, which are typical signs of qualitative research. So as you can see, this study combined both quantitative and qualitative methods and can therefore be seen as a mixed method study. But what do mixed methods actually add? Let's answer this question based on our case study. In their article, Beaver and colleagues wrote that in follow-up focus groups, we dove deeper into the barriers and facilitators of effective strategy use. And therefore, as you can see in this example, the use of mixed methods allows to better understand patterns which might not be that much visible otherwise. Or put otherwise, quantitative techniques can tell you what happens, but qualitative techniques can give you great insight on why it happens or how the participants feel with it. Often such aspects are not that much captured by quantitative techniques, and qualitative techniques can therefore help to nevertheless capture them. Dear participants, welcome to submodule 5.10 on collaboration with data owners. To discuss how to collaborate with data owners, let's first discuss who could be a data owner. Data owners could be national or regional statistical offices, public institutions, private organizations, or archives. Often, in the case of public data owners such as national or regional statistical offices, public institutions, etc., the data might even be available via websites. It might, however, be different in cases of archives and private organizations. Indeed, when it comes to archives, it might be different. Data might not be shared to protect privacy of the mentioned people. Imagine, for instance, that a researcher wants to analyze the great repetition in a given region, and this data is probably not publicly available, and even if the researcher wants to access them, the access to the archives might be linked to some restrictions. For instance, the researcher would not be allowed to take photos of the documents. A similar situation can take place for private organizations. In such cases, it might be required to sign so-called non-disclosure agreements, which regulate that data might be used for research, but may not be shared otherwise. So all of these aspects are important to take into account when collaborating with data owners, as they might have their own regulation or modus operandi when sharing data. Dear participants, welcome to submodule 5.11 on fair data principles. The FAIR data principles have been developed by Wilkinson and colleagues to provide a guideline for enhanced data reusability, not only by human users, but also by machines. And FAIR does not only apply to the data in a strict sense, but also to algorithms, tools, etc. that were used to work with the data. But what do the FAIR data principles actually require? The FAIR data principles require that the data must be findable, for example via rich metadata, the data being registered or indexed in a searchable resource, a unique identifier, etc. Furthermore, the data should be accessible, which means that the data should be retrievable via an open protocol, and that metadata is accessible. The data should also be reusable, which means that it has rich description with numerous attributes and a clear data license. And finally, the data should also be interoperable, which means that it includes references to other data. On this slide, you can see all the sources that have been used to develop this fifth module. To finish, the EFFECT team wants to thank you for having completed not only Module 5, but all of our modules. We hope that these have been useful to you to build further competences in evidence-based policymaking in education. If there are any remaining questions, suggestions, etc. regarding this module, please feel free to contact Professor Dr. Christoph de Witte, who is the main coordinator of EFFECT and the director of the Lehr Research Group at KU Leuven.